Welcome back to Star Spangled Gamblers, your guide to betting and winning on politics. This week, we're going to be hanging out with Tom Johnson from the People's House Project. Tom is involved with quarterbacking some of the tightest elections for some of the biggest upsets in deep red states. Tom, we're lucky to have you. Play that music. Welcome back to Star Spangled Gamblers. I'm your host, Alex Keeney. Just a quick reminder, we've got a blog. We're at www.starspangledgamblers. You can follow us there. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Star Spangled Gamblers. But we're really lucky today. We've got with us Tom Johnson, who is the Director of Communications for the People's House Project. Caveat, he's not here officially. But he's a smart guy who's got his finger on a lot of races that all the smartest people in politics are tracking. And we're really excited to talk to you, Tom. Thanks for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Alex.
Now, Tom, I'm not going to put words in your mouth. Tell our listeners who may or may not be familiar with the People's House Project what you guys are all about.
People's House Project is a political action committee that was started by Crystal Ball, who was a personality on MSNBC. She's run for Congress.
So she is a person, though. She's not a crystal ball.
Yes. Her email footer says, sincerely, Crystal Ball. Yes, that's my real name. So anyway, People's House is designed to identify and support candidates in mostly Republican-held House districts in the Midwest and Appalachian states that have been moving away from Democrats. And the theory behind it is that a real traditional progressive agenda will appeal in places that have been union-heavy, industrialized places in the past and that the Democrats have lost.
So let me filter this through the way that I've been looking at this election, and that is that I feel like cultural issues. This is not an election that seems to be over which tax plan or whether or not the regulatory constructs for the brick industry are better or worse under one candidate or another. It seems like a cultural election to me.
Well, People's House is in a very specific set of places where we find candidates who are not running on cultural issues. They're running on economic issues. They're running on issues of local importance. We don't want and I think Democrats in general, it's not productive to have this be an election about who uses what bathroom.
So let me ask you a question on behalf of undecided voters in Ohio, Indiana, West Virginia. I could go on. Are you running candidates who are indeed cultural moderates, or is this going to be the old bait and switch where January comes around and all of a sudden all our kids are wearing vagina hats to class and learning Spanish?
No. Our theory is, and the candidates that we find and support are candidates that are cultural fits with their district. And there's a lot of the cultural wars of the last 20 years that some people are still preoccupied with, but our candidates aren't because their people aren't. I mean, the people of West Virginia want to talk about economics. They don't want to talk about gay marriage. That's a settled problem.
So these candidates might not be preoccupied with these issues, but I know Tom pretty well, and I know that he is extremely preoccupied with one candidate in West Virginia. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone as in love with someone as Tom Johnson is with Richard Ojeda.
You should beat Crystal Ball.
I don't think she'd like me.
She is she's really a supporter. She lives in Virginia.
Well, that's the problem for just conservatives is all the liberals are moving to Virginia, right?
Yeah. We'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Richard Ojeda is one of our candidates. We were the first national organization to endorse him. We have worked very closely with his campaign. He is an extraordinary person who was supported by extraordinary people in his campaign. His campaign manager for a long time, I think well past the primary, was a long haul truck driver who would stop every 2 hours and make phone calls from the side of the road about the campaign and then get back in his truck and go. It's a real, honest to goodness, working people campaign.
So let me ask you, I think that a lot of people lose track of the bigger picture, which is some of these states, like West Virginia, is not a blood red state. People look at the last couple presidential elections and it goes a certain way, but I think that was Nick Rahall's old seat. You know, Robert Byrd, one of the most famous senators ever, is a Democrat from West Virginia. Is that infrastructure still left over from the kind of Robert Byrd, Nick Rahall era, or are you guys having to build a Democratic Party from the ground up there?
Well, I would never claim that we were building it. People like Richard Ojeda are building it. I don't think the infrastructure there is really terrific. I think that, and I'll make a broad generality about this congressional campaign that may or may not be applicable to gambling. I would think it would be, but the trend is away from national infrastructure and toward local infrastructure, and that's probably particularly true in the Democratic Party, where people are at the grassroots level are a little bit pissed off at the national party. Our candidates have had, in many cases, to fight the national party to get to the point where they can fight the Republican Party.
So, are you Tom Johnson on the shit list with like Nancy Pelosi and Keith Ellison, or?
Well, the great thing is Nancy Pelosi and Keith Ellison have no idea who I am. People's House is not their happy place, but we're a niche player. We're a niche. I mean, we support 8 candidates right now. We've endorsed a total of 14. We got 7 through the primaries and then added 1 after the primaries. So we are tiny. We are like, they're not going to get bugged by us because we couldn't possibly bug them.
So if you're listening to us for the first time, you don't know this, but I'll tell you because I want to be above board about it, which is I'm a lifelong conservative. I worked for Republicans in Congress. Now I work behind enemy lines in Hollywood. And I will say there are actually a lot of things about the People's House, which is a movement to elect Democratic members of Congress that really excite me. One of them is when Tom said yes to this interview, I started watching YouTube tape of the candidates they're working with. And there is a level of sincerity to these people that you don't see often in politics because they are not running for office with the talking points shoved into their mouth from national parties the way we're all so used to. He has Tom. Well, is JD Scholten a People's House candidate, or is he?
Yes. JD Scholten, Iowa 4.
Yeah, running against
Steve
King, and we would love to get rid of Steve King. Those of us sane Republicans are still out there. So.
Well, again, if you go back to sort of the mega trends of this election and things that people who are trying to pick candidates for gambling purposes might want to look at, one of the things that you look at is the close ties to the home district. The Democratic Party has had a tendency since the ascendance of the Clintons to pick candidates based on their access to money. That's not doing it right now. Those people tend to be wrong for the cultural fit, for the social fit with the district. So the candidates that you really want to look at and that you think could overcome the odds are candidates that are really closely tied with their district more than the national party.
So this is something I've been wondering, and I don't know the answer to it, but like, how much does money matter in this cycle?
It's a really interesting question, and our theory, the People's House theory, is less and less. That social media is a big equalizer, that correspondingly people are spending less time in front of the TV, particularly the younger voters that people are really thinking about, and money is all TV. And the conventional wisdom in the Democratic Party is you raise a bunch of money, you buy a bunch of TV ads and give 15% to the consultants who told you to buy all the TV ads. And so that's how the consultants make their money. That's not necessarily how to do it. Both Ojeda and J.D. Scholten in Iowa, and another one of our candidates, Janet Garrett in Ohio, who's running against Jim Jordan. Those people are all making huge hay with a combination of person-to-person contact and social media amplification.
Yeah, and when all of us think about the 2 candidates who really popped in the 2016 cycle, it were the 2 candidates who, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but probably raised the least amount of money. And those candidates were Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. I mean, no amount of Bush Clinton money could get Marco Rubio or Hillary Clinton across the finish line.
Jeb Bush was supposed to take it all. It was supposed to be a walk.
Yeah. And then you look at the way that this election is being fought, and you read about where the Congressional Leadership Fund, Paul Ryan's super PAC versus what's Nancy Pelosi's super PAC called? I don't know, but it just on an instinctive level, I feel like money is not what's moving people. People seem to have a very emotional investment in this election.
Well, and it's particularly true at the House level. When you talk about the Senate, and particularly when you talk about the White House, that's a completely different animal than a local congressional campaign in a place like the 4th Congressional District of Iowa, where they don't have a big media market. I mean, Sioux City is the biggest city in that district. So you're somehow covering 29 or 39 counties. I mean, it's a huge chunk of the state of Iowa. And it's not just buying TV ads in the big city. You can't do it that way.
So do you guys have do you have the opposite problem? So I worked for a really great member of Congress who represented a blood red state. And oftentimes I felt that we had to represent ourselves as being crazy to keep crazy people happy, despite everything we did to try and do the right thing. And if you're listening out there, no matter what, I think you can almost always err on the side of believing that your politicians, whether you like them or not, are trying to do good. Do you run into the same problem where there's so many people who are emotionally activated about this election, and you're running candidates who are not saying impeach him and are not saying burn it down? And
well, remember, the districts that I'm most familiar with, the People's House candidates, are, with one exception, running in heavy red districts. The West Virginia 3rd, which is our conversation piece today, went for Trump by 50 points.
Yeah, I think it's an R plus 23 or something.
Yeah. You're not gonna make friends there if you go around talking about how stupid Donald Trump is. The case to be made is a purely economically progressive thing, and one of the reasons that Richard Ojeda is a perfect candidate there is Richard Ojeda is very open about that he voted for Trump, and he's disappointed that Trump hasn't done what he wanted, and that, or hasn't done what he said he would do, and that to those kinds of districts is a much more productive appeal than going around saying Donald Trump is crazy and should be impeached, because that's tantamount to calling people stupid for having voted for him, and nobody ever votes for him if you call them stupid.
Do you think, first of all of you should hit pause right now, and you should go on YouTube and watch videos of Richard Ojeda, because you won't believe that he's actually a real person and someone who's running for congressional office. And that's the point where you'll be like, this guy has to be a congressman.
You'll never believe he's a Democrat. You can't get to the end of it and say, oh my God, this guy is just such a typical Democrat.
You will think, when I watch Richard Ojeda tape, what I'm thinking is, this is the guy that when he charges me $500 to fix my car, I'm like, oh, he's a good dude. That's what I get out of Richard Ojeda.
Well, he's a fascinating story, and you can edit all this out. This is more detailed. But he was 24 years in the military, and he came home to Logan County, West Virginia, expecting to live the good life that he had growing up, hunting and fishing, and in this small town that
hunting and fishing and loving every day.
As he used to say, I think he's been in 37 countries in the world, and he never feels at home unless he's in Logan, West Virginia. And he came home, and what he found was catastrophe. It had collapsed economically. Opioids were running wild. And so he came back, and instead of hunting and fishing, the first thing he did was start a nonprofit to buy shoes for kids to wear to school.
So literally, and I'm telling you, he's Rambo, right? He came back to his hometown, and it's run by opioid obviously this isn't true, but when you see Richard Ojeda, you have to see a little Rambo. You have to see a little bit of Roadhouse and Patrick Swayze in it.
Well, he made his bones sort of nationally and within the general population of West Virginia, because he was the driving force behind the West Virginia teachers strike. He was out there on the picket lines with them. He was in.
But he's not in the union, right?
No, he's a state legislator. He's a state senator, and he was just their advocate. You see the video of him storming up and down the lines, exhorting the teachers on it, and getting in his red Jeep and driving to where the electrical workers were on a picket line and storming around with them, talking about this is what we're fighting for, this is the future, and that's an old style Democrat that isn't a Nancy Pelosi Democrat. This is no. whatever your stereotype is. Is this
No.
Birkenstock wearing brie eater?
Like, I don't want to step on any toes, but like, if I don't step on people's toes, this is going to be the most boring hour of your life. But like, the Democratic Party used to be the tough guy party. Like, they were the guys who picketed in the 30s and 40s for labor, and they were the guys who like stood on the Selma Bridge and got the crap beaten out of them with baseball bats. And like, I, as someone who watches politics like a sports fan, love seeing these old school Democrats who like aren't out there telling you that you're triggering them, who are like really out there getting their fingers dirty and like the messiness of American democracy. That's not a call for violence. That's not what I'm trying to say. But like, it so often Republicans like myself felt like the Obama administration was so full of weenies because their complaint was every door has been open to us from day one, and now we're in the big leagues and they hit hard. And like, you see these new Democrats coming up who are here to play, and it's awesome.
Well, and it's also district by district. And again, the sample that I experience is skewed because we're playing in heavy Trump districts where you could be the most sincere, touchy-feely kind of Democrat that would make perfect sense in Northern California. And if you did it there, you'd be laughed out of every place and you'd be out of the election 4 months before the primary. The Democratic Party needs to find a way to have room for both styles of people. And the common ground, and this is a People's House theory, and this is actually the reason why I went and found Crystal Wall and went to work for People's House, is because one of the things that she said in the books that she wrote was that the common ground is progressive economics. It can appeal to both groups of people. And let's talk about that. Let's not talk about who uses what bathroom. Pick your divisive social issue that can get people out to the polls.
Yeah, and I think that some of these issues that you're talking about are not sexy issues because everyone wants to talk about who can use what's bathroom or, whether we should build a wall or something like that. But like, when you look at really affects people's lives, like the way that labor, it used to just be blue collar labor, but now that robots and people in India can do the jobs of lawyers and accountants and stuff like that, like the way that labor has so little clout. So like, that politicians are taking up these issues that we thought were settled. They're not settled. Technology and globalization has changed things that we thought would never change. And I think that personally, that has a lot more bearing on the way that the next 50 years of our lives will unfold than like, what pronouns we use to refer to each other. Let me ask you about another issue. I'm going to put on my crotchety former Republican hat now.
Tighten up your panties and get ready for a man question.
That's right. I've got some pearls to clutch here. I watch the blue wave that's coming, and I would be shocked if there is not a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives. But setting that aside, a lot of what is animating liberal politics to me seems almost theological. Convictions about borders and immigration and climate change and gender and racial inequality, like not issues that have a lot of space for negotiation. And when I look at some of the districts that you guys have candidates in, the question that sticks out to me is, how are these candidates dealing with immigration? Like, that seems like a really sticky issue.
It's very district to district.
Yeah.
Richard Ojeda, for example, is grandson of immigrants.
What kind of name is Ojeda?
It's Spanish. It's Ojeda.
Oh, really?
But it's just been pigeonized in the United States to Ojeda. J.D. Scholten in Iowa is in a district that has arguably the most rabidly anti-immigration person.
I don't think there's any argument at all.
Steve King. And also has an economy that is more dependent on immigrant labor every day. That's who works in the meat packing plants. That's who works, in lots of those heavy lifting agricultural jobs that nobody thinks about, and that does the seasonal labor that needs to be done in terms of the harvest and stuff like that.
But thanks to Congress, all those employers still have to publish paid advertising for American citizens to take those jobs that no one ever does, and then the migrant workers wind up doing them anyway.
Yeah. So it's an interesting argument in that sort of the instinctive cultural feeling of people in that district is that immigration is can be a negative, and the economic argument is that it's positive, and that's one thing that J.D. Scholten is working on all the time, and not out of sympathy. The motivation for this, Mr. Republican hat.
Hold on, let me take my golf balls out of it.
Is not that J.D. Scholten is such a big fan of immigrants. It's that he's a big fan of economic
So
growth.
let me push you on that a little bit. When I look at specifically the moment we live in today, this doesn't matter what I think. I'm interested in the fact that Tom is working with candidates who are rebuilding the labor movement that, as a conservative, I think this country actually really needs. But I feel as though that there's some recognition that having millions of people come to the country has to be a factor in depressing wages.
Well, I mean, this becomes part of the world. What does the theory say, and what is the actuality? And yes, by definition, when you increase the size of the supply of labor, and keep the demand the same, the cost of that labor needs to go down. The price of that labor needs to go down. Whether it's a meaningful amount of depression of the labor markets is debatable. I would debate it. I would say Certainly. It's not. And when you look at specific industries, the things that are causing labor, the cost of labor to drop, are things like automation competing with labor in Indonesia instead of labor, across the river in Indiana.
Right, like the middle class is in Asia now. It's not in the suburb.
Well, they're not middle class. They just work really hard and work really cheap, and they live a lifestyle that Americans would not settle for. I mean, we're in a sense spoiled. I wouldn't want to be a politician making that argument. And Mitch McConnell has made that argument. The problem with the auto industry is Americans make too much money. I don't know why Democrats haven't made him eat that for breakfast every day, but they haven't. I think in a lot of a thing that happens in our politics now on both sides of the aisle is that people take these little around the margin differences between things, and they inflate them into the end of the world.
Yeah, well, and immigration is interesting to me because immigration is like a sensible question, because there's like a few things that governments absolutely do. People, fine, argue about whether or not the federal government should be regulating your dry cleaner or the guy who sells you hubcaps. But I don't think anyone's arguing about whether or not the federal government should control the border or provide a military, or like there's just some basic stuff.
Well, and that is a perfect example of the way little incremental differences get inflated into the end of the world. Donald Trump is out on the stump now almost every day talking about how Democrats want open borders and they want all of these terrible things to happen. And the reality is the difference between sort of the mainstream Republican and the mainstream Democrat position on immigration is attitudinal more than at a policy level.
Sure. But so I'm watching some races that Tom is not involved with, but he's a maven, and I'm sure he's watching them too. So I'm watching these races down in Orange County, the real hearth of the Reagan Revolution, Orange County, California, south of Los Angeles. And it's like watching 100 years of cultural conservatism clash with like 30 years of kind of cultural college campus liberalism. And this is where I live. This is the place where I live in the world. And I see this confusion about the issue of immigration being like sometimes driven by the idea that people are offended that we would exclude anyone from this country at all. Like having an immigration policy to some people feels like they see it as tantamount to exclusion. And that to me opens so many interesting questions about the future of the world. Like, is that this is subject for someone else's podcast, but like, is the idea of a nation state, a place with borders and a place with an assumed shared culture and an assumed shared identity? Is that on the way out? If Hollywood thinks it is,
That's a conversation you have in a state with legal weed.
well, we are coming to you.
No, really, dude, yeah. It's important.
Yeah, well, we're in Louisville, Kentucky. It grows wild here. So, you want to take a walk out back?
I'm too old for that.
No. Well, okay, but let me ask you this question: like, what What is a successful election? Like, you guys are running candidates in places where it is long odds to win. Like, what is a successful version of this election for you?
For People's House alone?
Yeah.
In the People's House universe, if we can, there are, again, with one exception, which is a candidate, Johanna Hayes, that we've endorsed in Connecticut, who's running to fill a Democratic district. All the other ones are Republican districts. None of them are districts that anybody gave the Democrats any chance. If you go back 6 months ago, nobody had any one of those districts listed as anything but solid Republican. So we feel like if we can flip one of those, we've done a good day's work. We're looking right now like it might be 3 or 4 or more.
Pray tell.
Yeah. And the other thing is the longer term vision of People's House is that we rekindle the progressive fires in these districts that have a progressive history. So even the candidates who aren't going to win,
but when you say progressive,
are raising the good flag out there in these districts and making it respectable to consider voting for a Democrat.
Are you talking like progressive Ezra Pound, Carl Sandburg? What am I talking about? Finish my sentence.
I don't have any idea. Ezra Pound and Carl Sandburg get in.
No. Are we talking like
my guy that I always point to? My guys, and I get in trouble with this because I always point at Republican progressives, not Democrat.
Sure.
But when you talk about somebody like Teddy Roosevelt, when you talk about fighting Bob La Follette,
Trustbusters
of Wisconsin, it's anti-monopoly, antitrust, which we desperately need right now.
Yes.
It's keeping corporations living within civil bounds.
But do you have to explain that to people? Like, because I feel like now when someone says progressive, like what I hear living in Los Angeles is I hear the opening joke of this podcast, which is vagina hats and teaching our kids Spanish in school. Like, I feel like that's how so many voters hear it. Is it's their way of saying we want to be more liberal than the Democrats.
Well, and I think that's one of the things that in districts like we've been talking about in the Appalachian states and Middle West, our media have been so nationalized that those are the progressives they see. There essentially aren't local media anymore in most markets. And you end up with them thinking of that and not of somebody like Richard Ojeda, somebody like J.D. Schulten, somebody like Janet Garrett. Those are people that are part of their community and they're still progressives. It's not the progressive policy that lost the center of the country for Democrats. It was the cultural issues and the cultural chasm between urban states and rural states.
Let me ask you, though, I don't know if anyone here watches The Circus, but I'll put in a plug for it because I think it's the best show on politics. It's on Showtime. And Willie Brown was on last week's episode of The Circus, former mayor of San Francisco, probably one of the most powerful politicians in the history of the California Democratic Party. Maybe he's old and over the hill, but he was telling, I can't remember whoever the host was, that he feared that the turn towards cultural issues might cost the Democratic Party this election. I keep poking Tom because I want to find out, because conflict makes good storytelling. I want to find out if there's conflict in the Democratic Party about this.
Well, I'm not entirely certain that I can speak for the Democratic Party.
Aren't you guys all the same?
But there is, personally, not as part of my People's House work, I personally have been in arguments over the course of the last couple of weeks with people who think that a valid political activity now is confronting politicians in restaurants and yelling at them and, doing things that disturb the free flow of people's lives. I think that's a really counterproductive thing. And I think the Republicans know what's bad for Democrats more than Democrats do. And the Republicans are hitting that kind of thing hard. The mob rule kind of.
Republicans create jobs, Democrats create mobs.
Clever, but ahistorical.
That. I think that's Donald Trump's Twitter.
I know. It's his hashtag of the week, and the Democrats play into that. And there is, I think, the schism that I see in the Democratic Party is tactical more than it is anything else.
I watch this as someone who was working in the House after that 2010 wave election. And I feel like I am watching the same damn train wreck coming, where this new generation of like more polar, more ideologically committed Democrats, not your candidates, but many of the candidates running in other states, we call them the Tea Party with the Republicans. Maybe they'll just keep calling them the Blue Wave, where the Democratic Party is essentially split over, between true believers and pragmatics. So I can't see the future, but I wonder if Nancy Pelosi is about to be the next John Boehner.
Well, I mean, that might not be a bad bet.
Yeah.
That, there is a lot of discussion outside of the elites of the Democratic Party, that the Democratic Party needs generational change. That I have heard a number of people, like 8 in the last few weeks, refer to John Kennedy's quote about the torch has been passed to a new generation.
Yeah.
That we need that moment.
But who are those people? I mean, the story that was not written about enough during the Obama administration was the terrible election results. The big defeats that the Democrats experienced at the state and local level really hurt, like it drained their bench. So I don't know. I mean, Ben Lujan comes to mind, maybe. By the way, I've got a sizable position on Ben Lujan being the next Speaker of the House because it's cheap and it's not impossible. But like, I don't really know who's sitting on the bench. I suspect we'll learn some names in the next couple months, but I don't know if that generation is ready.
I have a pet politician.
Don't we all?
And he has shown absolutely no interest in running for the presidency. And there are good tactical reasons why that is. The most important of which is he's trying to become governor of California.
Gavin Newsom?
Gavin Newsom.
Oh my God, you're such a cheese.
I know.
By the way, Tom is big into the wine industry.
And I actually received an award that was given by his winery. So full disclosure. And they paid for a very nice vacation for me to Napa.
See, Gavin Newsom buying votes. You heard it here.
Oh, and I spent the whole time lecturing them on the wine business. They don't seem to have sought out my advice since then.
Yeah, I usually think that if someone who, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I usually think anyone that I like is just a goner. Like Ben Sass is never going to be president. I've got to accept that, but maybe the next best thing can be.
The guy, and this is really not what people who are thinking about betting on this election need to think about. The two people right now on the Republican side that I think are most interesting are Kasich and Nikki Haley.
Yeah, well, and
I wasn't impressed much by Nikki Haley for a long time, but just lately she's been.
Nikki Haley is what liberals think that Kamala Harris is. Like, Kamala Harris is like shitty off-brand Nikki Haley. Like, if Kamala Harris was a senator from South Dakota, no one would care what she had to say. Like, Nikki Haley is that triple threat of, like, she's got the identity politics thing going on. She's got being fucking one of the smartest, sharpest, and most well-spoken people in the game going on. She's got the fundraising thing going on. Like, she's the real thing.
She's also done something that the Republican Party as a whole desperately needs to do, which is to put some distance between conservatism and racism.
Yeah, I used to be able to say when someone would call the Republican Party racist, I used to be able to say, well, name one thing they've done that's racist, and then they just kind of look at me with a blank face. Yeah. But now Donald Trump is the president, so it's a little harder for me to do that. But if this was a different podcast, this is when I would get all sassy and say that thinking that you should have an immigration policy is not the same thing as being racist. But it's hard for me to
No, but
defend
racism is the same thing as being racist. And when you have mainstream commentators like Laura Ingram, whatever the hell her name is, going on the air and saying, we're undergoing these demographic changes that none of us ever voted for and we don't like it. That's an out and out racist statement. We don't want brown people coming here. And we don't want them because they're brown and they're different. That's not some subtle sensitivity on the part of liberals.
I mean, and this is why immigration is an interesting question, though, is because, like, ultimately it is a question of who you want your neighbors to be. And I don't side with people who say all of my neighbors should be the same. And I don't side with people who, like, the Chinese. I don't think anyone's going to sit around and say that the Chinese Exclusion Act was like a great day of democracy. And I don't think anyone who should hold federal office should have like the honest opinion that we should build a wall to keep people who don't look like us out. But like having a conversation about that, I don't think is an inherently racist thing.
No, but there are conclusions you can reach that are inherently racist. And when you say that, when the conclusion that you reach is we want white people from Norway and not brown people from Central America, that's racist. I mean, that by definition is racist.
Another one that I really like as a conservative who works in Hollywood is that I don't remember a time when like anyone ever said you couldn't get hired because you're liberal. But like I'm told all the time that if people know my politics, I can't get a job. And then like I read about the fact that, you know, Uber's was boycotted for like I don't know how long because their old CEO was on an advisory board to Trump, or that like Nordstrom stopped carrying Ivanka's shoes, or that, you know, what's his face from Google got fired for questioning the office diversity policy. And so like I think that I don't think that this is like the mainstream movement of liberal politics, but I think that it influences the willingness of conservatives to do stupid, like mean and crazy shit because they feel like that is being perpetrated on them.
Well, first of all, one of the things you see if you look at American politics is that it's always the liberals' fault.
Yeah.
No matter what it is right now, Mitch McConnell is out there talking about how the deficit the Republicans are running up, controlling all three branches of government, are the liberals' fault somehow.
That's
What you just said was the conservative misbehavior is the fault of liberals.
Yeah.
Now, the first part where you're talking about essentially PCs, culture, you're right. You're right. There is a thread of intolerance on the left that we need to stamp out as much as Republicans need to stamp out their racists. We need to stop letting people like that try to control the dialogue.
I think it's a minority of people too. Like I don't think there are that many people. I just think they have the loudest microphones.
Well, and there is a sizable group that I think skews younger that is just that is comfortable with the idea that there are certain ideas that shouldn't be discussed.
Yeah.
And I can I'm pretty close to a First Amendment absolutist. I can sort of understand that in a context of we really don't want people passing out Nazi literature in Germany. You know, I get that.
Yeah.
But having some of these conservative business plan conservatives who like to go to college campuses and collect their fees, get a lot of coverage in the media and cause a lot of outrage and get their jollies that way. Let them come. You know, pay no attention to them. You know,
their business
my
is
mom
outrage.
always taught me that the best first reaction to stuff you don't like is to ignore it. And I think if you ignored Milo, Milo would not be a factor.
Or Ann Coulter. Like there's a reason. Ann Coulter's a very smart woman. There's a reason she writes like an idiot.
Yeah.
It sells.
Yeah. Well, they're business plan conservatives. This is their shtick. This is their gig.
Yeah. But when that bleeds over to, I can't even remember. He's one of my favorite writers. Who was the AAI scholar who got beat up at Middlebury? Or Eric Cantor came to my alma mater once at Penn and wasn't allowed to speak. Like that type of stuff it makes my blood boil.
And I don't think you're wrong in that.
Yeah.
I don't, and that is a problem to people who are trying to win elections for Democrats, because it is a real thing that can be pointed at and that supports the narrative of mob rule.
Yeah, and I think that the concept of racism has been devalued because people's knee-jerk reaction to things they don't like is to call them racist. But like oftentimes that's not the issue. And like now after crying wolf too many times, like you have a real person in the White House who is like pretty obviously a racist. Because I just don't think like when you call John McCain and Mitt Romney the same things, you know, awful, what they said that Mitt Romney was a misogynist because he had binders and binders of women that he was trying to hire. He was trying to do exactly what these people wanted. But then when Donald Trump shows up and you've already used that ammunition on like two guys who just kind of remind you of your neighbor who drives like a Lincoln Town car to work, people stop listening.
Well, and that's what I was talking about in the nature of our politics, about small incremental differences being inflated into the end of the world. And that's happening for a lot of reasons.
Yeah.
Not the least of which is differentiation is good marketing.
Yeah. Yeah. John Dingell, who might be the longest serving member of Congress ever, but I heard him say once during a hearing on environmentalism, he's just banging his gavel and screaming, "This is not theology. Children, get in line." But maybe it is theology. I mean, you take an issue like climate change. You either think the world's ending or you don't think the world's ending. And these are issues that really motivate voters.
Climate change isn't theology because there's a lot of scientific evidence behind it. The example of theology that I would use is supply side economics.
Yeah.
That people believe absolutely in, and there's no evidence that it works. It's been a 30-year expensive experiment in exploding deficits and no apparent difference in long-term economic growth.
Sure, and I think political argument...
That's theology. When you believe stuff that can't be proven, it's theology.
But political argument usually takes the form of proving a negative, if that's the right way to say it. It's well, you think this, and I will point you towards an example where that is wrong. So, I take wholeheartedly, I lived through 2008, right? Almost everyone who is listening to this podcast lived through 2008 and saw what happened when you let commerce go unregulated for too long. But on the other side, I can look across the Atlantic Ocean and see, 20, 30, 40% youth unemployment in Western Europe in these social democracies, and economic stagnation that exists in these countries that oftentimes very liberal politicians say we should have political economies that reflect theirs. And that's certainly not a good outcome either. I think it's hard to really infer anything as a certitude. The concept of theology and politics is just a bad concept because there's neither the Republican nor the Democratic way is the right way.
Well, I'm going to put on my English major hat here. If you can put on your Republican hat, I can put on my English major hat.
That is a good-looking hat.
And yeah, it just doesn't serve much of a purpose. And say that when you say neither the Republican Party nor the Democratic Party is right, somebody's right. One party or the other is right, and our politics is about deciding which one of them we think is right.
That is true.
And right now, to me, on the big macro issues of our time, the Republican Party's just wrong. How in the world do you run $1 trillion a year deficits in a good economy? What the hell happens when the economy goes south? And there's gonna be another recession. What the hell happens? We don't have any ammunition to fight that. All we can do is either ride the sled down or start doing what they did in Europe in 2008 and start an austerity program that makes it worse. And that's just 180 degrees wrong from a policy standpoint.
Right, but the problem with budget deficits in this country is not it's not a revenue problem. We redistribute close to $4 trillion a year. I think we redistribute about 20% of our economy, which on average what we've done since the end of the Second World War.
Well, when you say it's not a revenue problem, you're making a whole set of assumptions that I don't agree with.
The point of that saying is that the problem that I think that our country has is normal people. There's not a bunch of rich dudes with gray hair. There's not a bunch of immigrants that are milking the system. There's just a lot of people who pay less into pension programs and Medicare and Social Security than they'll take out in their lifetimes. And that's a really shitty problem for a government to have to fix, because at the end of the day, it requires them to take things away from people. But at some point, I don't know how the bills get paid.
Well, but you also have to do that under the backdrop that one of our two parties here is dedicated to the survival of Social Security and Medicare, and one of them is not. The Republican Party has been against that stuff since the day it was proposed.
Anyway, this is not supposed to be a podcast where people sit around and talk about whether Medicare is good or a bad thing. Tom, you got any other candidates you want to tell us about?
Well, I've been thinking about this from a gambler's point of view. I'm going to be at Ojeda headquarters on campaign night, and I'm telling you, if he doesn't win, I don't know what's going to happen with me, because I will just break down and cry because I'm very emotional.
What do they drink there? Steel Reserve and plastic bottle whiskey?
I don't know, but I asked somebody close to the campaign a couple of weeks ago, and I said I'm coming to the headquarters that night, and I really don't know too many people with the Ojeda campaign. certainly not people who are going to be standing around doing nothing on election night.
They're not drinking the same wine as Gavin Newsom.
And he said, "Oh, that's going to be a party." So I'm going to get a little slice of West Virginia. Good times there. And he's got a huge bunch of volunteers.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to give you another one in Iowa.
Okay.
Who's not our candidate? Who
is this the Blum race
in
against
the
Rod
Iowa
Blum?
First? Blum and Abby Finkenauer.
Oh, he's getting smoked.
Yeah,
I got money on that.
He's the latest polls. I checked the polls before I came in here. He's 7 to 10 points down.
Yeah,
I mean, he's just getting waxed.
Smoked.
And Abby Finkenauer, he's good.
She's good.
Yeah, I was going to say
she's great.
Abby Finkenauer is somebody to watch. She really pops when she deals with people.
I think she's about a 72% chance right now to win. Yeah. That's a good value buy for sure thing.
I might take that bet.
I take it.
I'm not supposed to say.
You want to read about that? It's on our
but
blog.
I think she's going to win.
Check us out at StarSpangeledGamblers.com. We've got a piece on that.
Yeah. And then I like Abby Spanberger in Virginia.
Ooh.
They're the latest poll has them 43-43. What you're betting on with that race right now. I don't even know what the vocabulary for it is, but it's who has the momentum. Who is the person on that particular morning that has the excitement people are going to get out of
like
bed.
A football game where the last team to have the ball wins.
Yeah.
When I'm interested in this race, and the reason why I'm interested in the People's House Project is not because I like seeing Republicans lose. It's because I'm tired of Republicans.
You'll leave that to me.
Yeah, that's your job. Well, actually, we do a good job too. It's because I'm tired of Republicans running shitty candidates. And the People's House Project almost universally picks really high-quality Democrats that even I would vote for, and they run them against the shittiest Republicans who are the laziest, worst people in Congress. And I want them to win. Let me do a speed round with you here. All the Senate races everyone's talking about. Free association, 1 second or less.
Caveat that on a professional basis, I do not deal with Senate campaign. I am opinion.
By the way, neither do I, and I am too.
Knowledge is not necessary prerequisite for opinion.
Especially in politics. Indiana, Democrat Joe Donnelly hangs on, or Simpsons character Mike Braun gets the win.
I think it's a coin flip.
Too many words.
It's difficult for me to see Democrats winning Indiana.
Interesting. That's a hot take. By the way, I'm really glad I'm asking the questions, not Tom. Texas, does Beto O'Rourke have some magic that the polls aren't picking up? Can he knock off Republican Ted Cruz?
Well, Beto O'Rourke has some magic. I feel a little bit about that like I do about Indiana. I can't really see Democrats winning it. But Ted Cruz is the most hated man in politics.
Yeah.
I mean, so if as a betting interest, I probably stay away from that.
Nevada, Dean Heller lately has a lead on what's-her-face Rosen, the Democratic challenger.
Democrat.
Is it fake news? You think
I'm
Democrat?
going with the Democrat.
You're going Democrat?
Yeah.
You know something I don't?
Nope.
Okay. Let's stay in the Southwest. Arizona, Martha McSally or Kirsten Sinema?
Democrat.
Democrat. That's been a popular take to pull a Republican lately. Let's go with the biggest question mark of them all. Florida, Governor Rick Scott or what's his face who's had that job for so long? Bill or Bill Nelson?
I go with Bill Nelson. I think that Republicans are going to be priced down there by Mitch McConnell tipping his hand on his intention for Social Security and Medicare.
Do you think, though, that this race is being swayed by the hurricane created by liberal global warming that hit the part of the state that has the most Republican voters?
Well, first of all, let me disagree with you. It's not liberal global warming. It's Chinese global warming.
Okay.
I don't have macro enough knowledge of Florida politics to understand that. It seems to me like that hurricane has just sort of disappeared from the public consciousness. And credit where credit is due, Rick Scott is a great hurricane governor. I mean, that administrative level leadership of evacuations and stuff like that, he's great at that.
Yeah, being Skeletor gives you a lot of superpowers. What about Joe Manchin? It looks like the race is breaking to him. Should we believe the polls? Democratic
Yeah,
hold.
I think Manchin is going to get reelected on Richard Ojedi's coattails. I don't actually believe that, but it's just such a good one.
I've been hearing that too.
It's such a good soundbite.
Well, I'm out of hot takes and tight races. We'll be back. I don't know when, sometime soon. Hit us up on the blog. We're www.starspangledgamblers.com. We're at Star Spangled Gamblers on Facebook and Twitter. And
People's House Project is on Twitter at PHP2018. That's 2018. We are on Facebook, similar suffix to that. And our website is peopleshouseproject.com.
we'll put a link on our podcast on the website so you guys can find the People's House. Tom Johnson, smart guy, doing cool stuff. Thanks for joining us today.